And we're live. Hi, folks. Welcome to this week's Stripe Developer Office Hours. My name is Cecil Phillip, Developer Advocate here at Stripe. And today, we're going to learn about building AI agents with Temporal and Stripe's Agents Toolkit. And so here we have two of our friends from Temporal. We have Steve and Cornelia, and they're going to be showing us a lot of cool demos and showing us some patterns and practices that we could use as we're building out some of these AI agents. So before we start, why don't we just get into a quick round of introductions? Steve, why don't we start with you? Why don't you tell folks a little bit about who you are and what you do? And you're muted, so let's unmute you first. There you go.
Thank you. I'm Steve Androulakis. I am based in Seattle, originally from Australia. I'm a solutions architect at Temporal. And so that means I work with customers, Temporal customers such as Stripe, actually, and others like Netflix, and help them get the best out of Temporal. Before that, I was at Amazon, and before that, I was in biomedical science. So I've had a strange detour to be here, but I'm glad to be here, Cecil.
So for folks that have never, been on our channel before, Steve has actually done some videos with us before. And we actually have tons of stuff on Temporal. So definitely, one, recommend that you go ahead and watch some of those other Temporal videos that we have. And two, also, welcome Steve to being a returning guest. We don't have a lot of returning guests, so definitely happy that you can be here as a returning guest.
Thank you.
On Office Hours. And Cornelia is a new guest for us. We've never been here before on Developer Office Hours. So again, why don't you tell folks a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so thank you for having us, and having me as well. My name is Cornelia Davis. I'm also with Temporal. I'm a developer advocate, which basically means that I get to play with all of the emerging tech that both Temporal and the industry is generating as a whole, and then get to talk and blog and just have fun with it. So it's a pretty awesome job, I think, as you know, Cecil. My background is that I've been in kind of the cloud platform space for some time. I was part of Pivotal, so I did Cloud Foundry. So I love working, as I said, on emerging tech, and certainly Cloud Foundry was very emerging tech, predates Docker, predates Kubernetes, but had all that technology in it. Kind of helped bring us into the DevOps movement. Also did some Kubernetes, some GitOps. So I've been in this kind of developer platform space for some time. And so that's why I'm here at Temporal.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And you know what? Yesterday, you did a Temporal webinar, and I was actually hanging out in the room, and I had some questions. So maybe, depending on how this conversation goes today, I might bring up some of those questions I had yesterday from some of the stuff that you were showing off.
That's great.
But before we get into our talk, we're going to do a quick round of updates. We got a couple of things that are happening around the world of Stripe that I wanted folks to know about. So first off, some of you may know, we just had Stripe sessions in May, so not too long ago. But what usually happens is after Stripe sessions is the team goes on this thing called Stripe Tour. So Stripe Tour has officially kicked off, goes on between May and September. And we are going to essentially doing like a miniature version of sessions, but we're kind of doing it through a couple of different cities. So if folks are in any of these areas, Berlin, Singapore, Tokyo, Sydney, and New York, if you're in any of these places, definitely feel free to come by and check out some of the content, some of the announcements, some of the product updates and things of that nature that we will be sharing at Stripe Tour. And you can see we also went to London and Paris, but these ones already happened. So again, if you're in any of these cities, definitely feel free to come by and check out Stripe Tour. If you can't make it to Stripe Tour, we also have a meetup program. And inside of our meetup program, I'm going to just jump down to the groups because we have a couple of meetups that are actually happening. But in terms of where we have these meetups, a lot of those similar cities, New York, Austin, Chicago, we will be at reInvent, AWS reInvent in Las Vegas, coming down close to the end of the year. We're also doing meetups in Dublin, London, Paris, Amsterdam. I'm getting out of breath. A lot of these different cities. And we're looking at adding some other cities soon. So what we do at our meetups, I guess a little bit similar to what we do at Office Hours, just in person. We have a lot of technical conversations around like integrations and having folks that are building on Stripe. We have PMs, developers, open source folks all coming on and just kind of talking about not only that their Stripe experience, but sharing any types of patterns, practices, any types of insights they have in building some of those integrations. So if you're in any of these cities, definitely feel free to join us. I believe our next one is coming up pretty soon. We're going to be in London, Dublin, and Amsterdam coming up, I guess in like 2 weeks or so. So if folks are in any of these places, definitely feel free to come by. I think we have some Temporal folks showing up at some of these as well. I can't say it's all of them, but definitely a few of them coming up. We're gonna have some folks from Temporal there too. So again, if you want to come and hang out with us in person, there will be food. I promise we will feed you. We won't keep you hostage and not give you any sustenance, but definitely feel free to come over and hang out and chat with everybody there. Now, moving over to the content side a little bit. So over on stripe.dev, this is our developer blog hosted or managed by the DevRel team. One of the things that we like to do is encourage folks externally to write blog posts, or we love to welcome blog posts from external contributors. So this one was written from our friends from DocuSign, who talked about automating business workflows using DocuSign's, I think they call it their agreements management platform, where you as a developer, you can manage like the signing and approval of different types of documents, and then tying that into some of the workflows that we run inside of Stripe. So if maybe you're a DocuSign customer, or you have use of doing digital signatures and things of that nature, having that type of document management, agreement management workflow, definitely go ahead and check out this blog post from our friends at DocuSign to kind of talk about how you can make that happen with some Stripe stuff. Last but not least, most of you all are watching us right now on the YouTube channel. You're looking at us live, but I would also recommend you take a look at some of our pre-recorded videos. More recently, we released a series that talks about Stripe data pipeline. One of the projects that I'm really excited about, one, because I think it offers a lot of value to developers, and developers for some reason don't seem to know that we have this thing. So what Stripe data pipeline does is a service that it allows you to export data from your Stripe account, and you can send it to your data warehouse, to your cloud storage service that you have. And a lot of folks use this stuff for reporting, auditing purposes of that nature, or even training their AI agents, right? And like having some data that they can train them on. So really good if you're building things like recommendation engines, or again, just wanting to do just some general reports with Stripe data along with all the other data that you have in your databases and things of that nature. So definitely recommend that you check out that series if you haven't yet. Really interesting stuff happening there. Okay, now with that being said, I'm going to take my screen off and let's kind of dive into Temporal. Now, like I mentioned earlier, we do have a couple of videos on Temporal. So I don't think we need to go into what is Temporal, what does it do, we can kind of skip that and kind of like get into the meat of it. And I know today we're here talking about agents and agentic workflows and some of those types of things. And a question that I had as I've kind of been looking across the ecosystem is, I see a lot of these agent frameworks building their own workflow engine. And a part of me is wondering, are these engines that they're building doing something different than Temporal is doing? I'd love to hear your perspective on it. I don't want to see the conversation too much, but I'd love to hear what your thought is around, having a workflow engine that just kind of works with an agent SDK versus an agent SDK building their own thing from scratch.
You want to take this one, Cornelia, or are you happy for me to?
Either way, you can certainly start. I'll chime in as well.
All right, let me start as best I can. That's a great question, Cecil. We actually get that question a lot from people kind of interested in Temporal in the AI developer space. They correctly note that Temporal is a general, I'd say, durable execution platform or workflowing solution, and so they go, okay, well, how does that relate to AI in a world where there are AI frameworks out there that are specific for agentic AI workflows? And I would say that, you can probably think of the names of popular frameworks out there. They're definitely very batteries included. Some of them are opinionated on how to create agents, and they are actually, I would say, like an easy way to get started. But I would point a couple of things out about Temporal as a differentiator. A lot of agents, and AI is only the engine. It's a component or a central component of what you're trying to do or achieve business-wise. And you're likely trying to pull together lots of data and lots of tools from lots of places. And so AI is sort of a percentage of what you're trying to do, but not everything. And so I think a general, reliable at scale, proven technology like Temporal is great for AI. And also, I think I think there is some work Temporal can do actually to improve the abstractions, make it easier to create agents and do some stuff. And so we're doing a bunch of work internally. And I would say watch this space. You can create agents on Temporal today. I'll demo that to you, and it's a luxury. But for the getting started quickly, just like you can with the bespoke AI frameworks, I would say watch this space.
Yeah. So what I'd love to add to that is, and I know, Cecil, that you said that there's lots of videos, so I won't go into the details, but for those of you who are watching and listening who don't know much about Temporal, Temporal is all about resilience. It's about providing a whole bunch of resilience capabilities, resilience services out of the box. So you can kind of think of Temporal as a resilience backing service, so that when you're writing your applications, you get all sorts of reliability for free, if you will. So you don't have to implement retries yourself. You don't have to implement a whole like Kafka system behind the scenes, because we do event-driven architectures for you. So we do a whole bunch of, it's all about resilience. So going back to your question then, Cecil, you talked about these AI frameworks, and yeah, they're adding workflows. But the question is, are they adding workflows that provide that resilience and durability? And for the most part, the answer is no. And we're going to talk about that today. But the way that I the mental model that I have with these AI frameworks and what we do at Temporal is, I talked about being involved in developer platforms for a long time. The Spring framework was part of Pivotal the whole time I was there. So I'm a Java developer. I definitely am Spring. Spring did an amazing job creating abstractions. And then, of course, things like dependency injection and a slew of things. I think of the AI frameworks as the ones that are really like the Spring framework. They're giving you a whole bunch of abstractions and some implementations behind those abstractions. And for the most part, what they're doing is making connectivity to the AI agentic stuff easier, makes connectivity over to the LLMs easier, makes connectivity to MCP tools easier. They all also have like abstractions for the core event loop and things like that. But what's the engine that is actually running that behind the scenes? And that's where Temporal comes in. And so that's kind of the magic is, it makes sense for you certainly can, and you don't have to, but you certainly can use some of these agentic frameworks for those abstractions. But then what do you want to actually run your agents durably? That's where where Temporal comes in.
Yeah, and I love that word you use, resilience, right? And I think that's the key to that answer, because yeah, I just see a lot of folks trying to create solutions to a problem that we've already solved.
Yep.
And obviously, this is a Cecil opinion. This is not a Stripe opinion. So don't say Stripe said. Right? This is a Cecil opinion, 100%. But like I see we've solved workflows to an extent, right? Like we have workflow engines. Another thing I think about when it comes to agents is actors, right? Like actor frameworks, and being able to have like those entities, so to speak, that kind of like exist in space, right? But like you kind of know what their job is, right? But now I can distribute them globally, and then kind of have I could call into them based on identity. Depending on like whatever it is that I need to. Like these are the things that I think about. But then I look at so many frameworks recreating the solution, but we already have the solution, right? So I guess my question was around like the industry. Like I'd love to see more folks just we could just leverage some of the things that we already have. Like I think partnerships is like the key word here for me, right? Like how can we partner together as an industry, as an open source ecosystem, as a collection of folks that are just trying to build things in AI. And another reason why, like again, I've been watching some of the webinars that you folks have been doing, and I'm like, it just kind of makes sense, right? Like let's show how the right hand and the left hand could work well together, versus hey, I'm just gonna try and create this other thing, but then it really is not. It's not the best thing. You know what I mean? Again, and I'm not gonna call out anybody's names. We're to remain respectful today. But I just feel a little opinionated about it, because I just kind of feel like we have these solutions already. And I think a better approach would be for us to kind of like plug in together, versus like, let me go and create my own thing, so to speak. But anyway.
No, and it's kind of cool because Temporal's been out there for a long time, and we have major businesses running mission critical workloads on this engine, that delivers durability. So it's not that we're creating a brand new workflow. It just turns out that workflow is something that works for AI systems. And so we didn't build this for the AI use cases. It's been running in prod for more than 5 years.
Yeah. So I guess what do we talk about some of the things that you all have seen as, you've been working with folks that are building AI agents and building them on top of Temporal. Like, what are some of the things that you've been seeing or patterns you've been noticing as, we kind of continue to move forward in this space?
Maybe Cornelia, you start with the patterns, and then I can mention, one very large user of Temporal that I can finally talk about.
Yeah, that sounds good. And Cecil, if you don't mind, maybe you can, I'm just going to take the liberty of showing a couple of slides.
Okay, I'm going to bring your screen up real quick.
Okay, cool, I see it. So we like to think of these AI systems and particularly these agentic systems as distributed systems on steroids. And I mentioned, of course, that Temporal is about bringing resilience to these distributed systems. And for me personally, and I need to find my cursor here, for me personally, I mentioned that I have been in this platform space for a while. I was really very fortunate to be there at kind of the dawn of the microservices era. And this here is a screenshot from a presentation that a guy named Scott Mansfield, who was at Netflix, did that showed kind of the order of magnitude of the distributed systems problem in microservices. So this is to render the Netflix homepage. It makes all of these downstream requests to these microservices. He in particular had delivered a caching service. So he was all about how can caching make this whole tree more resilient. But there's a whole bunch of other patterns that you can put into place as well. And there's some assumptions here. And the whole punchline is that even if you assume great availability of each of these microservices, let's say 4 nines or maybe even better, you lose a couple of nines of availability by the time you get to the Netflix homepage. And that's with some simplifying assumptions like the network is reliable and those types of things, which we know it's not. And there's a whole bunch of patterns that we as an industry have implemented to make these systems more resilient. And we took on the burden, we as developers took on the burden of implementing all of these different patterns. But here's the thing, here's a basic AI agent, which just has this event loop where you're using the LLMs to decide on the next steps. Then you're doing some execution of those things, maybe calling MCP tools, those types of things. Then you do some observation of how the state of the system has changed. And then you seed all of that observation back into the LLM and you go through the next loop. Well, each one of those things, just in this simple picture, making a call down to an LLM, that's a distributed systems call. Executing tools, those are distributed systems calls. And increasingly, we have multi-agent systems where the execution is actually executing another agent, which has its own loop in there. And if we start to overlay all of the potential problems that can happen in this distributed system, you can see the corollary to all of this stuff that we've learned over the last 10, 15, 20 years around microservices. And the loop itself can go down. So now if we start to say, okay, well, I've got agents calling agents and I've got agents calling tools, it starts to look like the Netflix homepage diagram, except with one big difference. And that is that rather than each one of those nodes being just a set of downstream calls, they're making those downstream calls in a loop. So this is why we say these AI agents are like distributed systems on steroids. So instead of 100 downstream requests, you might have 200, 1,000 to fulfill a user experience. And now you overlay all those things on there and holy smokes, do you need some kind of a system that's going to make this whole thing work durably. Otherwise, you're going to lose more than 2 nines.
Yeah. When people are talking about these agentic workflows, I've seen 2 models. One where it's a little bit more deterministic, right? And so let's say each activity has some type of LLM or agent call in it, but then it's still wrapped in, your regular code. And then there's the workflow where the agent decides the path that it's going to go down, right? And you kind of just give it some stuff, and then it decides, okay, am I going to call another agent, or am I going to call a tool, or am I going to call an API? And it kind of makes decisions on its own.
Yep.
And it's kind of curious. I'd assume Temporal is more so on the former, where we kind of have preset activities and go, or
not at all. Not
really?
at all. And both of those models that you just talked about are absolutely valuable. You're going to have AI agents that are going to follow a more predictable path. And we're not so opinionated that we say, oh, well, that's not an agent. There is a religious war going on out there where people say, well, that's not really agentic and stuff. It doesn't matter. I mean, if it solves your business problem, great. And you can call it an agent for sure. But Steve is going to show you a demo later of this model. He's going to show you a demo of Temporal being used to implement that core agentic loop that you have in there, which is then going to facilitate calls down to all these downstream services. So Temporal isn't just going to give you that resilience in a predictable, like 100 downstream requests type of thing. It's going to give you that predictability in the 1,000 downstream requests because it's done in a loop. So.
Gotcha. Okay. Nice.
So maybe we stop sharing for a moment. I'll hand it back over to Steve, and he can talk about some very concrete customer use cases.
All right, great. So I'm going to take your screen off, Cornelia.
Sounds good.
And then maybe launch my screen, and I'll show you a use case that I'm excited about, and a Temporal user that I'm excited about. And Cecil, when we were at Stripe sessions in May together in person, I wanted to be able to talk about this, but I couldn't at the time. And I'm still limited in what I can talk about when it comes to OpenAI. So I have to be careful. But I'm happy to tell you that OpenAI use Temporal at scale. They use us for many things. But notably, they use us for ChatGPT images, which is the fastest growing app or feature of all time. And the reason they do this is because they originally built images to be synchronous. So you request an image, it kind of blocks on a GPU and you get your image, right? That takes time. And the other thing about something so synchronous like that is if you get a rush, which they did, they went viral. All of a sudden, those GPUs run hot and requests start getting denied. And so what you want to do is you want to actually re-architect your whole system to be asynchronous. You want to request an image, get a handle. You want to be allocated onto a GPU or GPU cluster, like essentially get a lease on it. You want to be able to get your image. And if the GPUs aren't available where you thought they would be, you actually want to, shed load or reallocate load elsewhere. You basically want to do this complex dance of making sure the GPUs are well allocated and sort of throttled where they need to be. And so in a weekend, OpenAI re-architected the images use case onto Temporal at the very beginning. There's a great blog post here on the bottom right from the Pragmatic Engineer, where he actually interviews some of the OpenAI people about this. But I'll just read this quote. And this should give you some indication about, I guess, how wide we are inside OpenAI at the moment. But Temporal is used for asynchronous workflows and operations inside OpenAI. Temporal is a neat workflow solution that makes multi-step workflows reliable, even when individual steps crash without much effort by developers. It's particularly useful for longer running workflows like image generation at scale. So images is not the only one, but it's the one I can talk about. And I just should point out the part of this quote that I like the most: without much effort by developers. So you can actually do this stuff with queuing systems. You can do it with state databases. You can do it with state machines. People have been doing this for years, Temporal, since way before Temporal. But I think the killer thing and the reason why companies like OpenAI and Netflix and Stripe and Airbnb and all these other sort of smart operators, I would call them, choose Temporal is just the ease of a developer experience in creating this stuff. No thinking about retries, no thinking about having to survive a process crash, no thinking about sort of the weird asynchronous Rube Goldberg machine you often create when you're stringing queues together in your event-driven architecture. And so, yeah, we're really proud of our work with OpenAI. And again, I would encourage people to look into this post here by Gojali on Pragmatic Engineer.
So, and I want to emphasize something that you said there, Steve. And so you talked about developer ease and joy and all that stuff. And I'm a developer. I love all that stuff. But the business value you snuck in earlier when you said the business value of that without much developer lift was that they got this thing done over a weekend.
Yes.
Like, holy smokes, that would have taken weeks or months to implement if the developer was responsible for all of that back-end tooling. No question.
I think there's an ethos usually that either you're going to be very scalable and reliable, or you're going to be easy to code. And so the reason why I joined Temporal is I think it's a solution where you can have both, and I think that's proven out here.
Yep.
That's amazing. Wow. I was thinking about it, and so we also use Temporal and Stripe for various infrastructure things, and for folks that are building their businesses, because one of the things I know someone's going to ask me is, why do you have the Temporal folks on talking about Stripe and Stripe as a financial company? Well, the fact of the matter is that as you're building out your businesses, like, these are the things that you care about, right? Like, you care about the resiliency, you care about the performance and the robustness of, maybe you're doing order fulfillment, or you're generating images, or you're running really heavy AI workloads that could be unpredictable, and you don't know what's how long is it going to take, or when is it going to finish, or I don't know how many tokens are you going to be using, or whatever the case is, right? And now you have the ability to add a little bit more reliability and resilience. I'm going to keep using that word that Cornelia used earlier. You're going to add a little bit more reliability and resilience to your workflow, on top of like the business value that you're offering folks, right? So seeing use cases like this for me are a great indicator of, I can trust building my business on top of this, right? And so now if I'm building a Stripe integration or not, what I mean? I know that like Temporal could definitely help me in the back end, like making sure that my business, keeps running, whenever bad things happen.
And one thing I should point out is sometimes people think that because you work with the big end of town and that kind of scale, that maybe it's difficult to get started. And the good news is, I mean, one of the reasons I joined Temporal is when the recruiters reached out, it's a MIT open source solution. So I just went to the website, I brew installed the Temporal server, I ran a sample, and I went, oh, this is amazing. And so, yeah, I wouldn't say that you have to get into some big agreement or like, instantiate some massive Helm chart or like have huge infrastructure to just start coding. And so that's really what got me. It kind of attacks both ends of town, so to speak. Your small use cases, being nimble, but also obviously frightening scale, like this images case.
Yeah, and I know we didn't really come here to talk about this, but in terms of the developer experience, when I'm building Temporal things, I generally just go with the Temporal CLI, right? Because I can spin up a local workflow engine, right? One CLI command, and I have the dashboard, I have everything I need to kind of get going and started. And now when it comes to, going to production, so to speak, like I really just point my connection string, or I point my endpoint somewhere else, right? But it's a full-fledged experience. And the reason that's important for me is because now I could build things like plugged out from the internet, right? Like I don't have to be connected to a thing to see how it works and prove the use case. But then now when it's time to scale out, right, and like go to production, I have the ability to do that too. So for folks that are interested, like I definitely recommend checking out the Temporal CLI. Big fan of that.
Yeah, and if you don't mind, can you switch to my screen real quick, Cecil?
Yeah, sure.
Give people a visual of what you just talked about. Remember, I mentioned earlier, I said something about Temporal. Think of Temporal as the backing service that offers resilience. This is kind of just a simple picture of it, is that when you talked about the Temporal CLI, you talked about running that box in the lower left-hand corner. Yeah. So running an instance of this backing service locally. And you can do all of your development. The reason that it's pink in both places is that there's an SDK that lives alongside your service that implements the resilience protocols on your behalf. And then what you did was you just changed where that was pointing. So you can point it to a more robust, cloud level scale instance of it, and you can get resilience on your resilience service that way. So
gotcha. So I'm kind of curious, so because I'm sure someone's going to ask this question. So there's nothing really in Temporal that's specific for AI agents and AI SDKs, but the already existing patterns that we have lend really well to that space, right? Is that fair for us to say?
Yep. That's a perfect way of putting it. And the number of times that I'm like listening to a webinar or looking at a video or reading something where somebody says, well, these AI systems are just distributed systems, that's why we're so applicable, because we're designed for distributed systems.
For sure.
We're also designed to be long running. Workflows can run forever. They can run indefinitely. And in a world where we get sort of these living, as I think of them, proactive agents, the ones that'll just be resident and make smart decisions when they need to, that's a very natural model for Temporal. You're not actually tying up a CPU process or memory by having a workflow wait to poll or wait for some event. It's actually a very it's a very computationally unintensive thing. Your worker essentially yields. And so that's kind of a massive power. It allows you to think, well, if I could have agents that just sit around and do things when they need to, what does that look like? And so it's a very natural programming model for that.
And then as you talk about workers too, another thing that comes to mind when I think about agents is, they could be very spiky, right? Like I can have one agent and then in the second, maybe I have 1,000 because I don't know, maybe I have OpenAI and a whole bunch of folks has decided to generate images, on a Saturday afternoon, right? I'm assuming Temporal also has the ability to elastically deal with a lot of that spiky traffic that comes in as well, right?
Yeah, we're horizontally scalable at pretty much every level. So for the user of Temporal, it's most often a just add more workers kind of thing, and you can auto scale those workers as well. So you might be running 10 today, you might have a rush, and then all of a sudden you add 1,000 workers, and that'll just handle the load. There's another piece. Obviously, there's a Temporal service that kind of coordinates what's being done, and that's what we were talking about before with the brew install. And that is very write heavy on a database. So you do need to have a database that can kind of take whatever load that you think you're going to have. Sure. And we also have Temporal Cloud, which is our paid for SaaS solution, which will scale for you. So you don't have to worry about that. But aside from that piece, like the database, I'd say the persistence layer, we're extremely, which is sharded, by the way, we're extremely horizontally scalable.
Nice.
Yeah. And going back to the visual that you still see on the screen, I think is that your workloads are running in these workers. You can think of those services that you see there across the screen as the workers. And so if you get more capacity, let's say you're running on Kubernetes and you've got an autoscaler attached to your worker, you can tie that autoscaler to some metrics and it can just automatically, instead of having 3 instances, you can have 300 instances. And then to Steve's point, you also need to make sure that little box in the lower left-hand corner, that needs to scale as well. And of course, your brew install isn't going to scale, but your production instance of that Temporal service, of course, is designed for scale as well.
Gotcha. Well, folks, I think it's time for a demo, because I think folks kind of want to see an example of what some of this stuff looks like. Is there anything that we could take a little peep at?
Yeah, definitely. So I if you want to flip to my screen, I have a slide to show you how the workflow fits together, and I won't labor over it too much. I might come back to it after showing the demo. I want to run the demo happy path, and then I want to run it sort of less happy path to show you how Temporal is resilient. But what it is today is it's going to be a chat-based AI agent. And the AI agent's actually generic. I've got this agent workflow, and the agent workflow is just told what tools it has and what goals it has. There's nothing in the agent workflow code that's specific to any particular goal or tool. So I could provide it food ordering instructions and APIs, and it would go drive towards that, or I could provide it something that's sort of payments related, and it could do that. In this particular slide, I'm giving it an MCP server config for Google Sheets, and also MCP Stripe, which is Stripe's agent Toolkit is the official name. And so it's basically telling the agent workflow, hey, you know how to do things with Google spreadsheets, you know how to do things with Stripe. Can you please discover these tools? What lives under these servers, create invoices, edit spreadsheets, that kind of thing. And then given that and the goal we give you, can you please work with the user towards whatever specific goal they have, which might be read the spreadsheet, create a bunch of invoices in Stripe or something like that. But either way, all of that is figured out, like the actual sequence of events and the tool calls are all figured out by the agent workflow without sort of bespoke code, without actually being told what to do. It's all discovery of tools, and it's all LLM driven. So like I said, I'll come back to that. That's a lot of info, but I'll show you a food ordering demo I put together with Stripe's Agent Toolkit. Let's get out of this. I'll go down on this. Okay. All right, so on the left here, I have my AI agent. It's a little chatbot interface that I created. And what it's going to do is when I send a chat message, it's going to interact with the Temporal workflow. And that's my agent workflow. And behind here, I have the agent workflow code, which I'll dig into. The goal I'm seeding into the agent today is I'm going to start the workflow and say, you are a food ordering assistant. So if I go to my environment file here, you can see that my goal is food ordering, and that's explained here. I've told it, hey, you know about the Stripe MCP server. And so if I go here, you could give this to Claude Desktop, for example, Stripe's Agent Toolkit, and then Claude Desktop would know what to do. In this case, I'm giving these instructions on how to run the Stripe MCP server to my agent and saying, hey, you know about how to do Stripe things now. Okay. And then there's a description of what I want to do, but I'm not going to labor over that. Either way, that's my input to the workflow. So let's start the workflow. And I'm using, I think, GPT-4o to begin with. Yeah, so I'm using OpenAI's 4o model to run the agent. All right, so I've started a new chat, and a chat is a workflow. And so if we go into this event history, you'll see that there's an initial prompt that I seeded, basically says, welcome me and tell me what you can do. You can see that came back here. Welcome to Tony's Pizza Palace, which is my food ordering place, restaurant of choice. And it says, you know, can I let me show you what we have available. How can I assist with your order today? And you'll notice here it did a discovery action as well. It actually reached out to Stripe's Agent Toolkit, the MCP server, and said, hey, what tools do you have? Like what Stripe things can you do? And one of the things it can do is I've got this product catalog in Stripe that I've defined. So ignore the last three here. That's for another demo. But these top four are my very realistic looking menu items for Tony's Pizza Palace. And it has prices. And if I click into it, it kind of has a description of the menu. Whoop. Oh, it's going to make me sign in again. That's all right. That was all I was going to show anyway out of the product catalog. I'm not going to labor over signing in, but just know that I have a product catalog in Stripe ready to go. And so let's say, how can I assist you with your order today? Well, show me the menu. All right. What's going to happen is that's going to send a prompt to the workflow called a signal. And that runs through the LLM. And it basically says to the LLM, which is GPT-4o, what things can you do to get to this goal? You know, how are we going to use Stripe's MCP server and other tools to basically get to this goal? And so what it did was it executed a tool called list products. And that's a Stripe MCP server kind of endpoint, I would say, or a tool. It's an MCP tool that in turn reaches out to Stripe APIs and sort of asks for that product catalog that I showed you before. And then you get this menu, right? And it even displayed the images that you saw on the other screen. So it tells me about the menu. What would you like to order? Okay, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, I'd like one of each pizza, please. There you go. And so the user prompt comes in again. It runs through a couple of LLM calls. The first LLM call just validates that what I said was in context. And now you see like a chain of tools running. Now, nothing in the temporal code is telling it to run these tools. There is no code that's deterministic saying, please list prices and then please do this and then that. Based off the prompt I gave it, it was like, I probably need to get the pricing for the pepperoni pizza and the margarita pizza. This was the decision that the LLM made. And then it chose list prices for both of those items. It's a bit like the tool calls are a bit janky because I'm trying to emphasize calling the Stripe MCP server, not like a real restaurant API. So there's going to be a lot of calls, but just see that it grabbed the two prices and it wants my email address to proceed because it knows it's going to need my email address to actually ensure that I'm a customer in Stripe to enact this transaction. So I say I'm steve@gmail.com, which is not real. Please don't email it. You might get someone else who's Steve A. And then it begins to add to cart. Now, cart is a tool that I provide. So this is a tool outside of Stripe's MCP server that I provide to keep track of what's in the cart. And it complements the Stripe MCP tools. It says it added both the pepperoni and margarita pizzas to the cart, creating a customer profile for you. What's your full name? Okay, so let's create a customer profile I'm going to be Steve Anderton today in Stripe. and that's what it wants. So I do that, and it should call like add customer or something. Yeah, create customer, which again is a Stripe call. Customer profile created. If I was logged in, I would be able to show you that, but I'm not, and I'm not going to labor over logging in. And then look at the chain of tool calls. It goes, okay, well, I have enough info to create an invoice. So it starts creating a Stripe invoice, and then it starts adding each invoice item to that invoice, because that's how Stripe's MCP server works. You can create an invoice and you can add each of these items. And so it added the pepperoni pizza to it. It added the margarita pizza to it. And then it finalized the invoice, which, by the way, is another Stripe MCP tool call. And if I load up this invoice that it created, you should see that it added one of each pizza, with correct pricing and everything from my product catalog. And so that there was a chain of MCP tools. If you see it here in the event history, there's a lot of MCP tool calls happening. And I should stress that none of this was chosen by me. The LLM, with knowledge about what Stripe can do with its MCP server, its agent toolkit, decided how to reach this food ordering goal and get me to the point where I've made a successful food order. So that's kind of like the happy path of the demo. I'm going to pause in case, Cecil, you have any questions or anyone else has anything about this, and then I can show you. I'll make things fail.
Yeah, I was taking a look in the chat. Not too many questions coming in yet. Okay. One of the things I love about the Temporal dashboard is like this level of observability that you're giving me, like the level of tracing I can have to see what's executing when and how long it's taking is really interesting to me, because, and particularly as I'm thinking about it, like you're executing like these different MCP tools, right? And so I could see, okay, you've called create invoice so many times and create customer so many times, right? And I think being able to, whether it's Temporal or I don't know, maybe folks are using OpenTelemetry or some other type of observability tool, I think it's so important to see the amounts of times these requests are made, because I've run into situations personally, this is probably a user error, so not blaming anybody else but myself, that I've hit like the limits of things, right? And then as I look into my logs, I dig around and I try to find them. I realize I've just ran, I don't know, like 30, 40 calls in like 2 seconds. And I'm like, well, why am I getting rate limited? Why have I hit my token limits and stuff like that? And so just in general, I'm just saying, like, I love being able to see visually, like this is exactly what's happening versus me having to go dig into some logs or, parse a text file of some sort, trying to understand like what exactly is happening here with my different agents and my toolkits that I'm using.
I feel like when it comes to an agent, knowing what's going on is half the battle these days. It's, especially if the agent's planning on your behalf, you kind of want to know, why did you make that decision, or what did you choose? And so I found as a development tool, like the Temporal UI is fabulous. Yeah, it really allows you to drill down onto, well, how can I make this more accurate? How can I make this a better experience? And I'm not claiming this is a great restaurant chat experience. This is optimizing for calling Stripe APIs, right? But it is plainly clear from this. And if you click on any of these tool calls, you can see exactly what went into the call, as decided by the LLM, and then exactly what came out. So this was creating an invoice item. The ID, must be that item, and the invoice is referencing the invoice, and sort of the result was true. And there must be input data in here for what item I was adding. Customer price invoice. And so you can see in great detail, if you need to, exactly what's going on in your agent as well.
Yeah, for folks that are watching, and I see looks like we have like over 100 people that are watching us at the moment. For folks that are watching, definitely feel free to let us know what, how are you implementing observability with your agents? I'd love to know what tools folks are using. I'd love to know what types of, Docker containers or whatever the case is that folks are using to run those things, because I think that's actually interesting thing to kind of dive into.
Yeah, and so I'm not going to show a full second demo. That I want to be mindful of time, but I do want to run some of it to prove a point. And the point I'm going to prove is that these LLMs are stateless, right? Everyone knows that they work on the context that they're given. All right, and in this case, they're being given the goal and the tools from MCP and the latest prompt. So if I say I want one of each pizza, it knows, given that context, that it's food ordering, and they know what the pizzas are because they gave them to me before and all that kind of stuff. The agent gave that to me before. All of that workflow state is in the workflow. It's just the goal, the tools, the conversation history, the tool call history is all stored up in that workflow and is given to the LLM when it needs it, in the way it needs it. And so the LLM can continue making smart decisions, but all of that is stored on the agent side. And to kind of prove that point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to swap LLMs this time, like in real time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start this demo again. Again, I'm not going to run it fully, but I'm going to start a new chat session.
Yeah.
And I'm using GPT-4o. All right. And so if I run here, somewhere in these worker logs, it'll tell me that I'm running, OpenAI GPT-4o. But if I go to the environment, what would you like to do today? Can I see the menu? Okay, so this call is going to be with 4o. But what if I sort of actually kill this halfway through? So I just killed that process. So I literally destroyed the app that was running this workflow, the worker anyway. And so this is stalled. It's not happy, but you would think the conversation is dead, especially if I swap out the LLM. So I'm going to get rid of the GPT-4o here, and I'm going to reconfigure my app to do Claude Sonnet 4, which, by the way, is risky because they rate limit me a lot these days. So we'll see what happens there. Being new, right? But it is a very smart model. So let's see how we go. So I'm going to rerun this stuff. Okay.
I'm just glad to know that I'm not the only one who's getting rate limited, to be honest.
Oh man, I mean, I have a relationship with Anthropic as part of Temporal, and I need to work with them to get a better set of API keys, I think.
Nice.
But anyway, cool. So here we go. We're running through here, and it looks like I've been rate limited already by Claude. Failure exceeds size limit. Okay, so we may not go to 4. Let's try 3. 3 tends to be rate limited a little less. But the point I'm going to make is the conversation will be rescued. Here we go. We're still running 4 because I haven't rerun the worker yet.
Yeah. But, so that comment that Steve made about the state being stored in the workflow. So that's what the agent is doing, is every single time it goes to the LLM, it is the thing that has collected all the elements of that context that the LLM needs to make its decision. And all of that's preserved for you. So, and that context is partially what was put in initially, and it's partially all of the things that happened until then. So that's a huge part of agents. And this is one of those examples, Cecil, where this is a technology that, it worked.
It worked. So Claude rate limited me like crazy. So it took 1 minute and 46 seconds, but eventually Claude came through with the goods and I was able to swap LLMs halfway through. Sorry to interrupt you, Cornelia. I got excited.
No. That was good. That was good. That was a perfect moment. So, but it kind of goes back to that notion of Temporal has always had that capability of preserving the state of the workflow. And the fact that memory is something that is not part of the LLM, that memory is part of the agent, and that memory is something that comes a part of Temporal in spite of crashes and changes in LLM models and all of that stuff, that is what made Temporal just so ideally suited to these AI use cases.
There you go. So I cut this chat short, but I again, for emphasis, the first couple of prompts in this chat were GPT-4o, and then I switched live to Claude 4, Sonnet 4, which didn't work, and then Claude 3.5, which didn't rate limit me eventually, and I was able to continue the conversation. Now, how that's relevant to real life is this will happen in real time. You will be rate limited, and so if you're trying to deploy anything in production, small scale, big scale, I would actually recommend having multiple LLMs and switching them dynamically. So you don't have to do it in end files like I did. You can have some logic that says, hey, if you fail the first 2 times or something, can you switch tracks from one LLM provider to another? And that's how you rescue this conversation in production.
I feel like I know the answer to this, but I'd love for you to talk to us a little bit about it. So you talked about the retry capability and whatnot. Like, I'm assuming those retries are configurable. And then what happens if I've exhausted the retries with Temporal? What happens after the bad thing happens and then it keeps happening, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I might ask Cornelia to give an answer to this, but I will point out that this long pale green stem is the period of time this poor LLM call was retrying for minutes and minutes, and then this was when it was actually running. So yeah, we definitely do, but I don't know if you wanted to answer this on Cornelia.
Yeah, sure. So of course you can configure the retry policies exactly the way that you would want. In this particular case, each one of those downstream calls is where we've wrapped it with the retry. And then you and your agent can make decisions. You can say, if it's been exhausted, if my retries have been completely exhausted, then do I want to pause for a little while and then circle back to it? Or do I want to now pause the workflow? It doesn't mean that the workflow ends. The workflow can remain running, but then you can use things like querying your workflows. Each one of the workflows, we have a way of querying your whole set of workflows so that you can identify the workflows that have stalled in a particular case. So you have all the control to be able to do that. Remember, it's just code. So you can decide what you want to do with those failures.
And the other the critical thing, Cornelia, is there's no cap on retries. So if you can actually have, so I think in this policy, possibly not good for a demo, but in this policy I do have a cap of 30 minutes, but you don't actually have to have sort of a cap on number of retries. You can retry infinitely if you want to.
Yep. And the other thing that you might notice is that the retries, those are managed up at the temporal service level. So the retry isn't just code that's running in your application. So remember that Steve crashed the whole application, but the retries are implemented in the service so that when he brought the application back, it's not like Spring Retry, which is just running locally in your app. This is actually retry as a service. And there's a huge difference between that because the retry didn't die with the application. The retry itself survived the application being taken down. And that's like, boom.
Yeah. Awesome. If folks wanted to see this demo, where could they go? Is this on is this on Code Exchange already, or is it on one of your other places?
It is. So let me show you where it is. I'll go there live. And then I actually want to show you what the code looks like for the developer experience over a minute or two if we had the time. If we don't, that's fine.
Yeah, let's do it. Go for it.
Okay, cool. Code Exchange. Okay, so if we go to Temporal Code Exchange, so temporal.io/code exchange, or just Google it or GPT it, you will see the AI agent execution using Temporal. You can go there. There's a neat little video of me using it about maybe 6 months ago now. So it actually can do a lot more than the video says, like call MCP tools. So if you go through to here, Temporal Community, Temporal AI Agent, you'll see the AI agent's reasonably popular. I mean, certainly for one of my code bases, it's got more stars and forks than I'm used to. And then, so there's some interest. And we've got MCP tool calling support. So that's covered in the setup guide. And so again, the emphasis is this demo has no connection to food ordering or Stripe in any way. You can actually set it up to do whatever you want with whatever MCP servers you want. And you're golden. So I encourage you to read the setup guide and plug in your own tools and see what you can do.
Yeah, and Cecil, you mentioned the webinar that I did yesterday. I used exactly this sample code to just code up a Hello World application.
Oh, nice.
So yeah, it's the same thing.
Yeah, awesome. This is a really great demo. So if folks, if you're watching, and I also have the link here, a couple of links. So this one is a link to Temporal for AI. And then for the code sample, I have it here somewhere. There we go. For the code sample, if you want to go ahead, here's a short link that you could use to get to that code sample as well. Go ahead and check out the code if you're curious to kind of see how it works on the inside of it.
Okay, I guess lastly on what I wanted to say about this demo is, and sort of agents with Temporal in general, is you may be wondering, how do you have this workflow that just kind of runs and then takes events like chat prompts and like at whatever time, right? What does that look like? Are there sort of queues you have to think about? Is there state databases you have to write these down into? And at its most simplest, I will just show this one slide with code on it. And this is kind of like a simplified version of what I just showed you. This is like a chat loop. And so there's literally a while true here. And while true, it's going to block on this wait condition of filling up a prompt queue. And the prompt queue is just a plain old Python SDK object, DQ object. Okay. How do we fill this prompt queue? Well, we define something called a temporal signal. A temporal signal is how you interact with workflows. So when I sent a chat before, what it actually did was signal the workflow, which were those pink or purple circles that you saw in the event history. And that added that information, literally just appended it to the queue, which unblocked this condition. And then you start making decisions. This is when you start sending it to the LLM with context and doing all kinds of stuff like deciding to call tools. And then once that's done, you go right back up to the top again. While true. So you can do this. So people think because temporal workflows or workflows are deterministic, that it must be A, B, C, D, and then finish. Well, this workflow could technically run forever. In fact, there's actually no return here. So this workflow has no way of ever finishing if we keep this current code. And so like it'll just receive events until the end of time.
So one thing about that too, like thinking like from a developer's perspective and just thinking about lifetime. So when you say it runs forever, it means like the same instance of that workflow runs forever. So if I think about state, I don't have to think, okay, if the workflow runs a second or third time, right? Like I'm maintaining the same state that's there, right? So because I'm looking at the top and I see you have like the prompt queue, right? But it's going to be the same queue, right? So if this runs multiple times, well, when I say multiple times for the same instance, right, of the workflow, not a different instance, multiple times for the same instance, it's maintaining the state for the same instance, right? Versus me having to like rehydrate the state for it all the time.
Yeah, so this chat session, like you could think about this workflow instance or execution as your chat session in my example, right? It's one conversation. And you're running this, and let's say I'm adding prompts to it, and you saw me running this on my computer. Like I killed the worker, I reran the worker. But let's say I stopped my worker, and then let's say Cornelia has my code base because it's on GitHub, and she started her own worker right now. And I'm sure you do have my code base somewhere on your laptop, but we're not going to do it live. But if I was to kill this worker with the demo, and Cornelia was to start the same worker and start polling that task queue, she would actually be the processor for my workflows. She would become the executor of those workflows, and all of that state that I created on my machine would be maintained because it's stored centrally with the temporal service.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay. And so now, what would happen? I'm sorry, Cornelia, go ahead.
I just want to say that it does, in fact, rehydrate it because remember, I'm now running the worker. Steve was running the worker. Now I'm running the worker. It does rehydrate it, but I don't have to rehydrate it. Temporal does for me. It rehydrates it.
Yeah, gotcha. Which is called replay in Temporal.
Gotcha. I think that's an important thing to think about. So for me as a developer, like I think about it as, okay, well, this is like a singleton, right? Like I have a single instance of this workflow instance that's running, right? And again, singleton from the perspective of like, I just created once for this instance. And now, again, when it quote unquote dies and comes back to life, right? Like you're able to bring back the state from that particular instance.
Yep.
Exactly. And this is kind of how that architecture works. So you have a temporal service that has all the queues, timers, retries, the UI you saw, and its job is to orchestrate work. It just really says, put something on a queue and says, this is the next step. And if Cornelia was to start her worker with my code in it, that worker would start polling, and it just goes, what's the next step? And it just gets the next step. And if the next step is, well, by the way, you don't know any of this context because the state came from somewhere else, like it's not caching it, it's a fresh worker, it will grab the history and the state from the temporal service, like what was happening in the conversation, and it would automatically rehydrate it or replay it into the worker, and it would know exactly what to do next.
Gotcha. And I love the fact that this is a very agnostic way of like creating things, because so for me, I'm a .NET developer, and I've been told that I'm old because only old people do .NET apparently. And so this is what I was told. This is not my words. But I'm looking at things like semantic kernel and Microsoft AI extensions to like build out some of these intelligent things. And I'm like, okay, well, I can definitely build this out with Temporal. Like I don't have to wait for someone else to build out like a workflow thing for my library, because again, like I said earlier, we already have the solution, right? Versus, I look in the Python space, I look in some of these other spaces, and a lot of folks are recreating this thing. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but I'm also saying like there's already a solution, you know what I mean? And so for me, if I already have the investment in Temporal already, I don't want to add another thing up on top of my stack, right? Like again, I already know how this works. I already have this in my ecosystem. I already have it running on different parts of my infrastructure already. So I could just reuse the thing I have already. And now it's just like a +1, right? Like it's a Temporal plus Stripe plus plus LangChain plus a Crew AI plus a Vercel plus a whatever kind of makes sense for me. Because again, I look at the bottom and you have these SDKs across a multitude of languages. So whatever it is that kind of just works for me, I could just pick that and feel comfortable with it going forward.
Yeah, and we have Ruby, by the way. I should actually replace this. No one respects PHP anymore. Sorry, any PHP fans, but we got Ruby, and and we're polyglot. So if you want your Python workflow calling .NET tools, you can absolutely do that. Like you can mix and match with workflows. And if you prefer .NET as you do, Cecil, I'm surprised you're not in a suit today. I consider .NET a very enterprisey kind of suit-wearing kind of language. Sure. And if you're doing that in .NET, but some some AI kid comes and wants you to connect to a Ruby or Python tool, you can do that as well. You can mix and match.
Well, I can tell you, I have the suit on the bed right now. I just got it dry cleaned. So right. The next trip I take is going in the suitcase, and we're gonna go somewhere fun.
Awesome, I believe it. Thank you.
That's awesome. Well, folks, thank you all so much for coming on, man. Like, I feel like we definitely covered a lot today. Steve, I'm going to take your screen off if that's okay.
Yep. No
yeah, we definitely covered a lot today. And so for folks that are interested, definitely, I think we mentioned before, go ahead and check out the Code Exchange. And then I'm also going to bring up some community links that y'all shared with me earlier. So there's the Temporal community Slack. So I'm in that channel as well, or some of those channels as well. So it's a great place for folks to talk about the different SDKs, but again, patterns and practices, and just kind of learn about how folks are doing stuff. And I also wanted you to kind of talk real quick about the Space Camp thing that y'all are doing. Like, what is this about?
Yeah, so Space Camp is a program that we run in the summer. School's out for the summer, right? And so we do fun things over the summer. Instead of doing long division, we go to Space Camp. And so we are doing that again. We had a summer camp last year. We're doing Space Camp this year. So it's a whole host of activities to bring the community together. The webinar you mentioned that we did yesterday was our kickoff webinar. So you can think of it as kind of the first skit at the campfire. Okay, I'm mixing metaphors. I don't know if they have campfires at Space Camp, but we have a series of webinars that are happening. We have trivia games that are happening. We are going to be doing some games later in the summer. One of them, hint, hint, a little spoiler alert, is going to be called Break My Agent. So we're doing a whole host of fun things. And so you can find that as well online to kind of get connected into that community. We've already got people competing on the trivia, but it's not too late. I think we've only posted 2 or 3 questions so far.
Okay, awesome. So folks, if you're interested, head over to this link that we're showing on the screen right now and go ahead and check out Temporal Space Camp. But other than that, I think that's about it for this week, folks. So thank you all for coming. Thank everyone that's watching and stuck around with us so far. And stay tuned for next week. We'll have another Stripe developer office hours. So thank you all, and we'll see everyone soon.
Thanks for having us, Cecil.
Thanks,
No
Cecil.
problem.